Welcome to the podcast, Aino.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So for listeners who haven't checked the show notes yet, who are you? What do you do, roughly?
Yeah, so my name is Aino Corry. I'm from Denmark. Originally, I wanted to be a researcher in programming languages, but in the past 20 years, things have changed a bit. So I've sort of gone back and forth between researching in academia and working in the IT industry. And then 12 years ago, something like that, I started my own company where I'm mainly doing three things. I am facilitating meetings for developers, retrospectives mostly, but also other things. I am teaching the teachers at the computer science at university how to teach computer science, because I've been teaching computer science for 18 years at university. So I'm teaching the teachers how to teach. And actually right now I'm teaching somebody who's going to teach the teachers how to teach.
Yeah, but who teaches the teachers?
Yes. So
it's you.
That's why my company is called Meta Developer, because it's very meta.
It's incredibly appropriate.
And very, yes. And then the third thing that I do is that I invite speakers for conferences. So I originally worked on the JEU conference, which became the GoTo conference. I've also invited speakers for the QCon conferences and for the YAO conferences. So, yeah.
So it's a very interesting and nice spread of activities.
I get easily bored. So it's good for me to have, I have maybe between 10 and 20 clients at a time, so that I can change what I do every day. Yeah,
it's fun because there's been a small running theme on the podcast about working as a freelancer of various kinds. And one of the things that keeps coming up is that, you can do many different things. It doesn't have to be one thing.
Definitely.
You can do what interests you.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, what interests you and what gives you money.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That's a minor detail.
Yeah, but you can choose a bit.
Yeah, you can choose, definitely. I like that freedom. Yeah, so that's me.
Yeah, it's also really interesting to talk about, because there's also something that's come up a few times. It came up in an interview I did an hour ago as well, that there's, academia versus industry. It feels like there could be much more interaction between them.
Yes.
And the person I was talking to was saying how he was building something new and he was researching, and he realized that there were academic papers.
Yeah.
But he had to go a long way around to discover them, because there wasn't anything in between.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, I think that some people have tried to do something about that. I don't remember who was it who wrote a little blog every day about a scientific paper that he read.
Oh, yes. I think I've read that.
Yeah.
Or once.
Yeah. So I signed up for it, but it became too much.
Yeah, same here.
I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
and I was full of good intentions.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that's the problem, really. That because we're living in two different worlds, we only have that bandwidth of things that we can read and digest.
Yeah.
So it's enough to be on our side of the fence. But so what I do when I'm at the university is that I really enjoy how the problems that these people have with teaching and listening to the problems academia. And I actually have some informal talks about what's actually going on out there in the industry.
No.
How do you actually do debugging?
Yeah.
Do people really have retrospectives and things like that?
Sounds like something they just say.
Yes, exactly. Which in some places is true.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, so there's definitely an interest on both sides of the fence, I think.
Yeah, so from my side, as working inside the industry, are there interesting things you think we should be learning from academia more?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think that being a little bit more curious when you start something and not having a very fixed idea about what you're going to do would be nice, like more hypothesis-driven development. But when I try to implement in various companies, we always have these stakeholders and clients and users and customers who don't like to work in that way. No. So it becomes mostly the thing that the startups are doing, like hypothesis-driven development. They don't know what they're going to do, but they have a lot of energy to do it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, research is going there as well, because there's not as much money in research.
Oh, yeah.
So they also have to say what have we done in 3 years? So in the sense that we're
like the horizons are shortening.
Yes. Oh God, I'm getting depressed now.
And it sounds like academia is interested in learning from the industry.
Oh
as well.
Yeah, very much. Well, parts of academia.
Yeah, of course.
Some parts think they know better,
Yeah.
but other parts really want to know what is actually going on in industry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to talk to someone who's actually seen both sides more frequently.
And I don't think I could. Sometimes I try not being academia, but I can't do that. Whenever I make the decision, I change my mind again. And so every time when I went back to academia to be a researcher, first I was a researcher in programming languages and design patterns. The second time it was software architecture, right when Bluetooth came out, and we programmed to the Bluetooth. And the third time, I was actually doing research in how we teach computer science. But whenever I'm back at university, and only at university, I miss some of the things in industry, like making quick changes or things like that.
Yeah.
Or the money.
Yeah, little things.
Little things.
It sounds like interesting research topics.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah, very much.
Did you feel like you made interesting progress in the areas?
Well, the first time when I was researching in the development of programming languages versus design patterns and how you use design patterns, I think it was interesting to see how the programming languages was actually built up from people who came from a different programming language. So I had somebody who programmed in one programming language for maybe like 5 to 10 years, and then moved to another programming language.
Yeah.
And then they want to take the language constructs with them.
Oh, yes.
So they start implementing that, and then it becomes patterns, and then the patterns becomes language constructs, and then the language constructs becomes part of the compiler, and then it becomes hardware.
Like solidified.
So I'm not sure I changed anything, but I definitely understood something. And the thing about software architecture, well, I think we did some work on programming to the Bluetooth and supporting what we call ubiquitous computing, which became pervasive computing, and which is IoT now.
Yeah, just a switching labels.
Yeah. So I think that some of the work that we did with architecture about that maybe has survived.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
yeah, I got strong, clear memories from when people were starting to write more and more JavaScript.
Yes.
And because it had Java in the name, they almost like bring Java patterns to it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Those were the days.
Yeah, but it feels like JavaScript mostly got away from it eventually.
Yeah.
People actually figured out how to write stuff in.
Yeah. I think that there was enough people who actually became experienced in JavaScript and supported programming that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even so, it has picked up a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
As well, but maybe in a more balanced way than it would have.
Maybe.
It's really hard to say. So speaking of like patterns, it's a big topic as well.
It's a big topic, yeah. So I have been fascinated with patterns since '95 when the Gov book came out.
No.
I remember I was at the brink of making my master's thesis. And I wanted it to be solely about language construct and how to implement language constructs in different languages. But then my advisor said, there's this new thing about patterns. Maybe you should take a look at that. And I thought, that sounds really boring.
Yeah, it's not an exciting name.
No, it's not an exciting name. And also, there's nothing new in patterns, right? If you're experienced in the field and you see patterns, people are saying, there's nothing new in that. This is what I always do. And that's the point about patterns, right?
Yeah, being able to talk about it.
It's a pattern that you see.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, if you're trying to teach patterns, which I tried at university to students, they're like, oh, this is amazing. We're going to implement these things everywhere.
Yeah.
And then you have like 30 singletons in your systems. You don't really need a visitor for that and things like that. So it's a concept it's a simple concept, but it's difficult to implement in the right way, I think. But it really works with the way that my brain works is learning things by patterns. I think the conceptual model of brains is that most people learn like that, but I can only speak for myself. Is that it really is the way that I understand things. I think about it as a pattern of things, how it goes together, how it's related to other patterns, and what I do with these patterns. Yeah, so I finished my master's thesis in patterns, and then I did the PhD in patterns as well. And then I did some teaching in patterns and used patterns in implementation, but then I didn't really touch it until somebody asked me to give a talk in 20 minutes, and it had to be a new talk. It was at a conference, and somebody bailed out, and I said, what can I talk about? What can I prepare in 20 minutes that I haven't talked about before? And it dawned on me that what I could talk about is all the mistakes I make when I facilitate retrospectives. So I made a little talk called Retrospectives Antipatterns. and I had maybe 3 anti-patterns in that talk, and people liked it.
Yeah.
And then I started talking about it more, and the presentation got longer. It became a whole course, and then people asked, where can I read more about this? And I said, there's no way you can read more about this. And then they said, why don't you write a book? And I said, I'm not going to write a book. I did the PhD, and I hated it. Yeah. But then, like 7 years after that, there was a book.
No, people keep asking.
People kept asking.
Was it more enjoyable than the PhD writing?
Yes, it was. It was more enjoyable, yeah.
That's good. That's good to hear. So, it wasn't like pulling teeth the entire way.
No, I didn't have to reinvent anything.
No, that's...
So, because it is patterns, it is anti-patterns, but it's patterns. It was just about looking at all the mistakes I made. It was painful.
Yeah.
But it wasn't difficult.
No.
But it was definitely painful to try to look back at all the notes. So every time I facilitate a retrospective, I make notes about what happens. And then I look back into those books, and I could see the patterns of the things that went wrong.
Yeah. And you just had a presentation about it here.
Exactly.
So we'll, of course, link that in the episode as well, so people can take a look.
So they know what I'm talking about when I talk about my mistakes.
they can find it out because I think it's really... I mean, anti-patterns are a really useful thing to talk about as well, because being able to see patterns in stuff you do yourself that's not constructive.
I agree, but it was actually difficult to sell the book to an American publisher with that title. They really didn't want it. I tried different places, and they said, we don't want a negative book. And I said, it's not a negative book. No, but it's anti-patterns. They say they don't think it's very constructive. But I say, yes, but for every anti-pattern, there's a refactored solution. Yeah. And there are so many books and so many articles about how to facilitate retrospectives. I think it's time that people can see themselves in the mistakes that I've made and accept that everybody makes these mistakes, because it's easy to make these mistakes. And what can we do when we're planted in this anti-pattern? How do we get out of it?
Exactly.
How do we avoid it next time? So actually... Greg Dunch, my publisher, he said that it was okay for him with the anti-pattern. But he has been in Scandinavia a lot, so maybe that's why he accepts it.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess I can see the reaction that it sounds negative, but I mean, I also think anti-pattern is sort of, it's quite an energetic word. It sounds interesting.
Yes,
there's something going on here.
Yes, but it also takes a little bit of self-irony to talk about your own anti-patterns.
Yeah. But I mean, when I read the title, I don't think that it's a sort of a personal attack on me. It's more like, let's improve our processes.
Exactly.
And that's what retrospectives are about as well. So it feels very natural.
Yes, actually, yeah. Well, one could make the philosophical remark that if people don't like to talk about anti-patterns, maybe they're not ready for retrospectives, right?
No.
But that's let's not go there. We'll talk about that tonight over beer.
Yeah, exactly. That's the right situation for everything. Yeah. So when it comes to like patterns and anti-patterns, I guess, in general, do you think, do people use them and think about them the right way? Because to my mind, it feels like it's one of those things that feels both underused and overused at the same time, somehow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about design patterns now, for instance.
Yeah, I guess we are, yeah.
I definitely think you're right, that it's a thing that people can easily overuse or underuse. Some people are saying, we don't want to do design patterns. Mm-hmm. It's too simple. It's too silly. Mm-hmm. We're not doing that. And some people say, it's great. We want to use them all the time. And I remember once I was talking to somebody from Google, and they were implementing JavaScript in the Chrome, I think, at the time. Yeah. And I talked to them about design patterns, and they said, no, we're not using that. We're above that. Maybe we use a visitor from time to time, but
sure.
We don't want to use this that other people are using. And I'm overdoing this a bit, of course. But then I said, but don't you have any patterns in your workplace? Don't you have anything like, this is the way we do it?
No.
You teach the new people. And first they said, no, we don't do that. We don't waste time on that. But isn't there something that you tend to do over and over in a specific way? Mm-hmm. And then I thought about it, and I said, actually, yes. So when we suspect that there's bottleneck in the system, something is taking too long. Yeah. Instead of trying to remove the bottleneck, because that takes a lot of time, we test if it is indeed the bottleneck by doing it twice. So if we think running this algorithm is a bottleneck, we'll run it twice. If we think collecting things from a faraway database is the problem, we'll do it twice. And if the time goes up a whole lot, then it probably is the bottleneck.
yeah.
And then we can focus our time on changing it, because it's so much easier to make it double than to remove it, and then it turns out that wasn't the bottleneck. We had to work on something else. So we quickly named that the double bottleneck.
It's a really good name as well.
Yes, and it's a name that everybody could use. Like if they suspect a bottleneck, they should try the double bottleneck.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point about patterns for me now, is that I'm not so interested in whether people are using composite or visitor or whatever they're using. Microservices is also a pattern, sometimes an anti-pattern, but mostly a pattern. But what I'm interested in is that when people start in the company, or when they are communicating about the way that they do it here, that they might think about the level of abstraction there is in a pattern, that if you give it a name, that solution, you can actually speak on a much higher level of abstraction. Now I can just say double bottleneck to you. I don't have to say all the things again. I can say, let's try a double bottleneck, and you know exactly what to do. So you can actually, you can communicate about design on a higher level and more efficiently. So I think that it's about accepting that design patterns is just an abstract solution to an often recurring problem in your domain. And then maybe thinking about what are the patterns where you are.
And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it feels like I haven't really thought that clearly about patterns we have and giving them names that are meaningful to us. It's more like you think of the book and then you think of the list in the book. And that's kind of a limited
it is very limited. And then if people can't make use of these patterns, then they're like, we don't want to use design patterns. But I think that for every organization, they should think about what are the patterns in our organization, because it makes it so much easier, for instance, with onboarding, that you tell people, this is how we do this. This is how we solve this.
Yeah, exactly.
And then give it a name. Which is also why in my book, I don't just give it a name, I also have a picture. So I have a picture for each anti-pattern, because some people are verbal, they like the names, but some people remember things with pictures. So maybe they remember it's all red octopuses. Maybe they remember the red octopus was trying to lift a weight, and then they remember that the soup, right? So I think pictures can be important as well. But
do you think this is an impossible question as well, I guess, but do you think patterns or anti-patterns are more important to discuss?
I think it depends on where you are with where you are in your journey in learning that. I think that if somebody comes up to me and they say, I've just started facilitating retrospectives, should I read your book? I said, no, don't read my book. First, read Daniel Larsen and Esther Darby's brilliant book, Agile Retrospectives, or maybe Norm Kurth's Project Retrospective. Read those first, because then you get a gist of it. Then you understand what it's supposed to feel like, what it's supposed to look like. And then when you have a little bit of experience, it's a good idea to go into the anti-patterns. But I think if you're a novice, it's hard enough to put value to the patterns, because you don't think you've ever been in that problem. Why would I be in that problem? Of course, I don't need a pattern solution to that. But it's even harder, a harder level of abstraction to try to imagine that you are in an anti-pattern. Because I would never do that stupid. Of course, I wouldn't let the loud mouth speak. Of course, I wouldn't jump to conclusions in the Wheel of Fortune. Obviously, I would never do that. So I think that patterns are important if you in the beginning of your journey with any domain, with anything that you want to be an expert in. And then when you've appreciated the basics, you can start looking into the anti-patterns. That's classic.
Read something and then try to apply it before you have the context for it. Same thing with patterns, I guess. If you hear about it in education and then, I need to apply this pattern, but this code example is 15 lines. So it doesn't really...
No, it doesn't really... No, it
doesn't pay off.
Yeah, that's a problem, that you need to have the problems to appreciate the solutions. Have you ever seen the original Anti-Patterns book by Mowbray and the others?
No, I don't think so.
No, because that's the one that has inspired me. I don't remember what year it was. I was at a conference somewhere, and I think it was Mowbray or one of the other authors about the Anti-Patterns book that gave a talk about it. And I was just fascinated by the thought of learning from mistakes instead of learning for from methods or algorithms. And it just makes so much more sense to me, because it's more likely that you can make a story around it. It's more likely that you can laugh about it.
Yeah.
And it makes it more likely that basically you remember it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember from his talk was the blob antipattern, which is where people started using object-oriented programming at the time when the book came out. And he said that the blob is like when you have a class that it just subsumes all the functionality of the system. So when people say this class is the heart of our architecture, this is when the alarm bells should go off. And then the refactored solution is, of course, to drag the methods out of this class and put it into other classes. It's a bit like microservices.
Yeah, true. Microclasses.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Once someone has put words to it.
Exactly. Words are important.
Yeah, very important. I guess that's also sort of an academic thing too. It's worth thinking about, the words and what they mean. And
Yeah, it quickly sounds like something very academic and philosophical and abstract, that it's so important what words you use, but it really is important.
Yeah.
Because for instance, with the blob, now I told you the blob, but when I say this, you will never forget it. The blob is called, its name is from an old sci-fi movie where there was a big black jelly blob that landed on the earth, and it would move along, and when it met something, that would become part of the blob. So everything would just be eaten by the blob. So that's the thing you should think about when you think about that class, that it just eats everything.
Antipattern eating the earth.
Yes, exactly.
Very scary.
We've been very efficient.
Yeah, I think so. Is there anything else we should go into? Or I will link to everything, of course, as well. I like making extensive linked lists.
You remember to find the link to that man who made all those journals, because it's such hard work.
Oh, yes.
You can find him.
Was it the morning paper?
Yes, the morning paper. Yes. Well done. Thank you, Frederick's brain.
Usually doesn't work that fast.
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing about brains, right?
Yeah.
You give it a bit of time, talk about something else, it will continue to work on it, and then it comes out. And I think that maybe that's the thing I want to end on. That when it comes to teaching and when it comes to facilitating retrospectives, I think the most important thing is to try to understand how brains work.
That's a big project, but it's worth it.
It's a big project, but it's worth it, I think, because then you can support the people in the ways that the brains don't work very well. Right? And see how can we make them think about things? How can we make them talk about the right things? How can we make them talk at all? Things like that.
Yeah, and put names to things so we can talk about them.
Exactly.
Very nice. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Fredrik.
Tusen tack för att du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Vill du stödja oss? Tipsa en bekant om podden eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes. Du kan också köpa prylar med Kodsnacktryck eller stödja oss med en kaffe på coffee.com. Alla länkar och alla avsnitt finns på kodsnack.se.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.